all of the intervals in the diatonic system use numbers to identify the distances between notes based on their alphabetical names, not based on their pitch alone. Interval structure. What is interval structure? What are intervals? An interval is the distance between two notes, but not just the distance between two notes, because let's say we start on C, on the first fret of the second string. Now I play that C, and then I go up a half step from there. That's going to be C sharp. Well, that is a half step between C and C sharp. Does that interval have a number? Because intervals have numbers like thirds, fifths, sevenths, sixths. In fact, if I go from C to C sharp, what number do I give that interval? Well, believe it or not, that would be an augmented first. What does that mean, an augmented first? Well, C is the first note, and I'm going to C sharp, so I'm augmenting it. I'm going up a half step from C to C sharp. But, well, if I go from C to D flat, that is a minor second. C to C sharp, C to D flat, it's the same thing, right? Well, you might think so, but let's go a little further with this example. Let's say I go from C to C sharp to D. Well, I've gone 2 half steps. 2 half steps, and I've gone from C to C sharp to D. 2 half steps, that's a whole step. And a whole step is a major second, but a whole step can also be a diminished third. If you call this note C sharp and you call this note E flat, you are going a third between those two notes. It is a whole step, but it is a third. Interval relationships, which basically end up being the same two notes described a number of different ways using a number of different numbers, are called enharmonic equivalents or enharmonic intervals. A major second is always a whole step, and a minor second is always a half step, but a half step is not always a minor second, and a whole step is not always a major second. What's up with that? Well, when we say half step, we're talking about, on the guitar, the distance from one fret to the next adjacent fret, and we're talking about the difference in pitch between those two notes. But we are not giving them a numerical value right away. We're not saying that this is an interval of a second, because it could be an interval of an augmented first or an augmented unison, or the same thing. An augmented 1, C, C sharp, that's an augmented 1. C, D flat is a second, but they're both half steps. And if we go another half step from C to D, that is a whole step, and it is a major second. But if we go from C sharp to D sharp, well, yeah, that's also a major second because we're going from C sharp to D sharp, and that is also a whole step. But if we go C sharp to E flat, what do you call it? It has to have a name. If you go from C sharp to E flat, it is not a major second, even though it is a whole step. And if you go from C to E flat, that's a minor third. But if you go from C to D sharp, what is that? Now, if you play those two notes on the fingerboard, 3 half steps, well, a lot of people would say that's a minor third. C, C sharp, D, D sharp. A lot of people would say that's a minor third. And they would be wrong. C to D sharp is not a minor third. C to D sharp is an augmented second. What? that's a minor third. When I do that with my hand, that's a minor third. I can do that over here. It's always a minor third. Yeah, it's a minor third. That is true. That's a minor third. But not if you call that note D sharp. If you call this note C and you call that note D sharp, it is an augmented second. If you call this note C and you call that note E flat, then you have a minor third, because C to D to E flat is a minor third. A minor third is not just 3 half steps. A minor third is a whole step and a half step, because the intervals names, the names we give the intervals, are based on the alphabet first and foremost. They are based on the alphabet within the structure of a key or a scale where you are counting alphabet letters first and foremost. C, D, E flat, 3 alphabet letters makes that interval a third of some type. If it is a whole step and a half step, it is a minor third. If it is 2 whole steps, C, D, E, 3 alphabet letters still, but that is a major third. Well, you might say, well, we call that a minor third because it's 3 half steps. That makes it a minor third because there's 3 half steps. But the major third has 4 half steps. Well, why is something with 4 half steps called a third? Well, there is an answer. The answer is because you are counting 3 alphabet letters, C, D, E. That's what makes it a third, just as C, D, E flat is a third because you are counting alphabet letters. It is not C, D, D sharp. It is C, D, E flat, if you want it to be called a third. And that comes in when you are naming the notes of a chord, when you're trying to identify the notes of a chord. If you find a shape on the fingerboard that produces a sound that you like, and you want to use that in a piece of music, and you say, okay, that's kind of cool, I like that. What am I going to do with that? What do I do with that? What is that? What is that chord? That's a chord, right? There's 3 notes. It must be a chord. Okay, let me look at the actual notes. That's going to help. Let's name the notes. This is an F. How do I know it's an F? Well, let's say you're finding your way around the fingerboard and you don't absolutely already know that that's an F. That's the 8th fret of the 5th string. How do we know that that's an F? Well, you could start with the open strings. You could go, okay, A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, and then finally F. Yes, congratulations, you have found the note F. But what is that note? Well, you might already know that that shape is a minor third, but you might not know the name of that note. Let's say you don't know either of those things. You don't know that that's a minor third, that shape on the fingerboard, and you don't know what the name of that note is. You know that's an F, but let's say we do the, really typical method that most people do when they're starting out, is to start with the open string and kind of count up from there, starting with the open D string. That's where that note is on the D string. D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp. Oh, that's a G sharp, right? So I'm going from F to G sharp. F, G sharp, right? Isn't that right? Well, yeah, that note could be G sharp. It could be. But if this is a minor third, that note is not G sharp. That note is A flat, if this is a minor third, which it is, which we want to call it that, because it's going to be part of a chord. Anytime you have a minor third, you must have 3 alphabet letters between the first note and the last note inclusively. So if the first note is F, that's note number 1. The next alphabet letter after F will be G, and the next alphabet letter after G in our musical circular alphabet will be A. And so this note cannot be G sharp, it must be A flat. It doesn't matter that you can get there by going D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp. You can get there that way. You can get to that note, but you don't automatically know that it must be a flat and not G sharp, because you are not using the interval structure as your map, as your template. Whew. A lot to think about, right? Okay, so why do notes get called sharp and flat in the first place? Now, if you think that that must be a G sharp because you went up the scale to get there, another mistake. That's not why we call it sharp or flat. We call notes sharps or flats not because you had to go up or down to get to them, but because of where they fit in the context of the harmonic structure of the music that you're playing. If you have a chord where the low note is an F and the next note is an A flat, well, that's a minor third. And we have to determine if F is actually the root of the chord or if it serves some other function. How do we know whether or not F is the root of the chord? Well, we have an F and an A flat. That's a minor third. Is it an F minor something? We're going to have to know what that next note is and what role it serves in the chord. Well, okay, that's the third string on the 7th fret. We could count up from the open string: G, G sharp, A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D. Well, that would be a D, right? Why would it be a D? Because we're going F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, D, F, A. We're looking for a series of thirds. To form a chord, you must have, most of the time, there are a few exceptions, but we're not going to talk about exceptions right now. We're going to talk about the basic idea, which is what you will encounter most of the time, 90-something%. If you have 3 notes and you can organize them, regardless of their octave positions, into a series of thirds, then you have a chord. In this case, there are 3 notes, and there are third relationships between those notes. If you start on D as the root note, and then you go to F as the third, and then you go to A flat as the 5th, D, F, A flat, you have a D, F, D to F, D, E, F. D to F is a minor third. How do we know it's a minor third? Not because there are 3 half steps, but because it is a whole step and a half step. And when we go from F to A flat, F, G, A flat, that is also a minor third because it is a whole step and a half step. Why don't we want to count all the notes in between? Why don't we want to go F, F sharp, G, G sharp? Because you're not going to get to A flat that way, first and foremost. If you count that way, how do you know that you're at A flat? You don't know that. You don't know that that note is supposed to be A flat by counting half steps. It's not obvious. You know that it's got to be A flat because in a scale, and this is really important, in a scale, in any key, you will never have 2 half steps in a row. So you can throw out the idea of counting in half steps right out of the gate, because you cannot go 2 half steps in a row and still be in a diatonic key. If you're playing the notes of a diatonic key, you have 2 whole steps, a half step, 3 whole steps, a half step, 2 whole steps, half step, 3, etc. That goes around in a circle. So if you start from any note and you count from that note to the next note in the key, it will either be a whole step or a half step between those 2 notes. If it is a whole step between those 2 notes, the next note could be another whole step, or it could be a half step. If you start out with a half step, the next note cannot be another half step. The next note must be a whole step if you're in the key. Now, if you already know that that distance on the fingerboard is a minor third, or that that distance on the fingerboard is a minor third, that's a minor third, that's a minor third. It's the same minor third. F to A flat, F to A flat, not F to G sharp. Again, because F to G, we don't want to go F, F sharp. Why not? Because there is no key in which you have an F and an F sharp. So this is another important aspect of understanding intervals. When you count alphabetically, because intervals are alphabetical first and foremost, when you count alphabetically, you cannot use the same alphabet letter twice in a row. This is just a basic rule of music theory, of the grammar of music theory and interval structure and chord structure. You cannot go from F to F sharp. You have to go F, G. You go F, G, and then the next alphabet letter. And if the next alphabet letter is a half step above the second one, if you start on F and you go G, and the next note, the note is a half step above G, then the note is going to be not G sharp because you've already used the alphabet letter G. It's going to be A flat. You don't have to know anything else. You don't have to know what key you're in. You don't have to know even what the chord is going to be when you're done counting all the notes in the chord. Start with that idea. Start with the idea that you are going to use a new alphabet letter for each note. You are never going to play 2 half steps in a row, and that will get you there. Counting by half steps will not get you there because you will not know whether a note should be sharp or flat just based on counting half steps, and you will probably never hit a flat because you're always going up, right, when you count in half steps that way. I mean, I don't know anyone who starts out by counting intervals descending, because most of the time that's not the most practical way to do it anyway. Intervals are based on the root note, which is theoretically the low note, although it doesn't have to be. And that kind of brings us back to the nature of this chord. This chord is a D diminished first inversion triad, a fancy name for a chord that has the root as the high note. D is the high note in the chord in pitch, but it is the root because it is the first in a series of thirds, in this case 2 thirds in a row, 2 minor thirds in a row, after which there are no more thirds, and before which there are no thirds in this group. If you're trying to figure out what chord you're playing, and you can turn the notes into a series of thirds, then you do. If you have a series of thirds, in other words, a root, a third, and a fifth, a major third and a minor third, 2 major thirds, 2 minor thirds, this chord is a self-contained unit. It is a self-contained structure which can be extended. This chord can be extended into a B flat dominant 7th chord simply by adding a B flat underneath it. Think of the triad as the chord molecule, and it is a very strong structure musically, and it is made up of a pairing of thirds, a third from the root to the third and a third between the third and the fifth. And if you understand what a third is and how to name the notes of a third correctly, then you will have a clearer idea in your mind of how chords are structured, because you will understand the logic behind the names of the notes in the chord and the numbers that we give them. We're talking about understanding the basic structure of intervals and how that relates to chords so that you get it right, so that you don't mess around with extraneous information that you don't need. Counting intervals based on half steps is extraneous. It is true that a minor third is 3 half steps, but extraneous. It is true that a major third is 4 half steps, extraneous. A perfect fourth is 5 half steps. A perfect fifth is 7 half steps. A major seventh is 11 half steps. A minor seventh is 10 half steps. Why do we care how many half steps are in these intervals? It's factual, but it's irrelevant. And it complicates things unnecessarily. It takes you outside of the key relationships. It takes you outside of the harmonic structure of the music and has you counting things you don't need to count. It's extra counting. It's not germane to the subject at hand. It's not how intervals work. If I have a student who comes to me and tells me that a major third is 4 half steps, I have a nice, long, quiet talk with them. And I make sure that they get why it's true that a major third may be 4 half steps, but that we don't care. What we do care is that it's 2 whole steps. What we do care is that it is 3 alphabet letters. That's what really matters. All of the intervals in the diatonic system use numbers to identify the distances between notes based on their alphabetical names, not based on their pitch alone. The distance from a C to an E flat is not a minor third if you call those same 2 notes C and D sharp. That becomes an augmented second. A major second is a whole step, and you are now making that second bigger by a half step by keeping the D in the name of the note. C, D, 1, 2. C, D, D sharp, 1, 2, augmented 2. D sharp is an augmented second of C, period. It is not a minor third of C. E flat is a minor third of C. Now, I hope this makes sense. I hope this makes sense to you guys because I speak the truth. And if you want to get it and you want to understand how the system works and you want to, just ace the whole thing, that's something you got to know. So I want to thank everybody, by the way, who has liked and subscribed to my videos. I want to do a lot more of them. I want to keep doing this. I need people's support. So like and subscribe. Visit my blog. Listen to my music if you want, if you can stand it. And I want to know what you think. So comment below. And I will see you again. Thanks.